In 522 BC, beneath the searing blaze of the eastern sun, the grand palace of Susa gleams with opulent menace. Young King Cambyses II, heir to the towering legacy of Cyrus the Great, stands poised to deliver a justice as ruthless as it is unforgettable. Before the hushed court, an old man trembles, his weathered face etched with dread. His name is Sisamnes, a once revered royal judge of Persia, now teetering on the edge of a fate so grim it will resonate through the ages as a chilling warning against corruption. Soon, the piercing screams echoing through the marble halls will signal not just a man's demise, but the birth of a legend. A judge flayed alive, his skin stretched across the very seat where his son will inherit his mantle. What fatal misstep led this esteemed figure to such a horrific end? To unravel this, we must step back to the moment when Sisamnes made the choice that sealed his doom. In the vast Persian Empire, the greatest power of the ancient world, the judicial system was fundamental to maintaining order across territories stretching from India to the Mediterranean. Royal judges occupied positions of extreme prestige, serving as direct representatives of the sovereign's justice. Sisamnes had served for decades in this role, adjudicating disputes, judging criminals, and arbitrating conflicts between nobles and merchants. In a society where trust in justice was an essential pillar of political stability, judges were expected to be incorruptible. That, at least, was the expectation. Reality, as often happens, proved more complex. Ancient historians, primarily Herodotus, the father of history, report that Sisamnes succumbed to the temptation that accompanies power: corruption. The case that precipitated his downfall involved a territorial dispute between two Persian nobles. One of them, knowing his legal arguments were weak, offered Sisamnes a substantial amount of gold to influence the verdict in his favor. The judge, perhaps believing that the young King Cambyses, occupied with military campaigns and consolidating his power, would not pay attention to a seemingly minor case, accepted the bribe and delivered an unjust sentence. No empire, however, maintains its greatness without an efficient information system. What Sisamnes did not know was that one of the scribes present at the trial was loyal to the nobleman who had been wronged by the corrupt decision. This scribe gathered evidence of the bribe and presented it directly to King Cambyses, who had recently returned from a campaign in Egypt. Cambyses, too, was not known for his clemency. The son of Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire and considered a relatively magnanimous ruler by the standards of the time, Cambyses had ascended the throne determined to prove he could be as ruthless as his father had been visionary. Heir to a colossal empire, he was resolved to demonstrate that justice under his reign would be swift and exemplary. Upon receiving evidence of Sisamnes's corruption, Cambyses did not hesitate. He ordered the immediate arrest of the judge and summoned the entire court to witness the trial. The symbolism could not have been clearer. He who should judge would now be judged, and there would be no appeal for his sentence. Sisamnes was dragged into the great hall of the palace, where the king himself presided over the session. Witnesses were heard, evidence presented. The judge, confronted with irrefutable proof, confessed his crime. The confession, however, did not appease the monarch's wrath. On the contrary, it demonstrated to Cambyses that corruption had taken root at the heart of his judicial system, a threat that needed to be extirpated in the most forceful way possible. The sentence came directly from the sovereign's lips: death by flaying, not a private execution, but a public spectacle, so that all would learn the price of corruption. Yet there was an additional element to the punishment, a refinement of pedagogical cruelty typical of Persian political thought. The corrupt judge's skin would be used to upholster the judicial chair that would be occupied by his son, Otanes, who would succeed him in office. On the morning of the execution, the palace courtyard was filled to capacity. Nobles, merchants, scribes, and foreign diplomats, all summoned to witness royal justice in action. Sisamnes was brought in chains, his dignity already eroded by the knowledge of the horror that awaited him. In the center of the courtyard, a wooden table had been installed, surrounded by braziers to heat the executioner's tools. The Persian method of flaying was refined in its brutality. It wasn't simply about tearing off the skin, but doing so methodically, keeping the victim alive and conscious for as long as possible, and preserving the skin in a single piece for later use. The executioners, specialists in prolonging suffering beyond what seemed humanly bearable, began their work with clinical precision. First, incisions were made along Sisamnes's body on his back, chest, and limbs. Hot water was poured over his skin to soften it and facilitate the procedure. Then, with special tools resembling spatulas, the executioners began to carefully separate the skin from the flesh, inch by inch. Sisamnes's screams echoed throughout the palace. Some of those present fainted at the sight. Others turned their faces away, unable to bear the spectacle. But Cambyses remained impassive, observing the punishment he himself had ordered, ensuring that the message was conveyed with absolute clarity. Persian justice would be incorruptible, or the price would be unbearable. The complete flaying process could last for hours. Death, when it finally came, resulted from a combination of shock, blood loss, dehydration, and hypothermia. For without the protection of skin, the body rapidly loses heat and fluids. According to Herodotus's accounts, Sisamnes remained conscious throughout much of the process, his suffering amplified by the understanding that his own skin would serve as a permanent reminder of his crime. After the judge's death, his skin was carefully treated with salt and other preservatives, transformed into leather through processes similar to those used for animal hides. This human leather was then used to upholster the judicial chair where his son, Otanes, would now exercise the same function as his father. The image is almost inconceivable to modern sensibilities. A son forced to sit daily on the skin of his own father, administering the same justice that his progenitor had corrupted. It is important to note that, according to Herodotus, the appointment of Otanes was not an act of gratuitous additional cruelty. In Persian tradition, important positions often passed from father to son, and Otanes was likely already being prepared to eventually succeed Sisamnes. Cambyses, in appointing Otanes to his father's position, not only followed tradition, but transformed Sisamnes's punishment into a perpetual lesson for his successor and for all judges of the empire. The message was clear. Always remember, Cambyses is said to have told Otanes during his investiture, "Upon what leather you sit when pronouncing your judgments." We do not know with certainty how Otanes dealt psychologically with this macabre reminder. Herodotus mentions that he eventually became a satrap, a provincial governor in Ionia, suggesting that he fulfilled his duties satisfactorily. We can only imagine the thoughts that passed through his mind each time he sat in that chair to administer justice. The story of Sisamnes and his terrible punishment would remain alive not only in historical tradition, but also in art. Almost 2,000 years later, during the Renaissance, European artists would rediscover this account and transform it into powerful visual representations. The most famous of these is the diptych, The Judgment of Cambyses, by Flemish painter Gerard David, completed in 1498. This monumental work, commissioned by the alderman of Bruges to be hung in the town hall, shows in graphic detail both the arrest and the flaying of Sisamnes. In the upper right extremity of the flaying panel, Otanes can be seen seated on the chair upholstered with his father's skin, a tiny but meaning-laden detail within the larger composition. It is worth noting that the choice of this theme to decorate a town hall was no accident. During the Renaissance, the story of Sisamnes was reinterpreted as a powerful warning about the dangers of judicial corruption and the necessity for honest magistrates. Places where judges and public administrators worked often displayed representations of this story as a constant reminder of the consequences of corruption. Other artists who portrayed the theme include Willem Isaacs van Swanenburg, who in 1607 created an impressive engraving based on a drawing by Joachim Witteweyl, showing Cambyses ordering the flaying of Sisamnes, with Otanes seated on the chair covered with his father's skin. Even in the modern era, the story of Sisamnes continues to exercise considerable symbolic power. In 2012, protesters brought reproductions of Gerard David's painting to a Moscow courthouse during the trial of anti-government demonstrators, in a clear message about perceptions of judicial corruption. The execution of Sisamnes raises, of course, profound questions about justice, punishment, and the use of terror as an instrument of governance. By contemporary standards, flaying represents an unjustifiable cruelty, regardless of the crime committed. However, in the context of the ancient world, where public executions served not only as punishment, but as educational and preventive tools, Persian logic had its own internal coherence. By transforming Sisamnes' body first into a spectacle, and then into a functional object, the covering of a chair, Cambyses was not merely punishing one man, but creating an enduring symbol. The chair, upholstered with human skin, became a permanent monument to the dangers of corruption and a daily reminder for all those who administered justice in his empire. The story also underscores the fundamental importance that ancient societies attributed to impartial justice. In a world without the complex systems of checks and balances that characterize modern democracies, the honesty of judges was crucial to the legitimacy of governing power. A corrupt judge not only harmed individual litigants, but threatened the very stability of the state. Although the specific details of Sisamnes' story have been preserved primarily by Herodotus, whose work Histories was written approximately 75 years after the events, there are reasons to believe in the general authenticity of the account. References to the practice of flaying as a form of execution appear in multiple Persian and Assyrian sources, and the utilization of human skin for various purposes is equally documented in several ancient cultures. Moreover, the didactic and symbolically charged character of the punishment aligns with what we know about Persian practices of justice and demonstrations of royal power. For a multi-ethnic empire that encompassed vast territories and diverse cultures, public and memorable demonstrations of power were essential instruments of governance. The historical figure of Sisamnes and his terrible fate remain one of the most vivid and disturbing examples of judicial punishment from antiquity. Whether as a historical character or as a symbol, the flayed judge continues to remind us of the perennial ideals of impartial justice and of corruption as a fundamental betrayal of public trust. When modern judges assume their functions, they fortunately do not sit on chairs upholstered with human skin. Nevertheless, the principle that Sisamnes' story so graphically illustrates, that corrupted justice deserves the severest consequences, continues to resonate even if now materialized in more humane forms of accountability. What is perhaps most disturbing about this millennia-old story is how it continues to find relevance in contemporary contexts. Whenever cases of judicial corruption arise, the image of Sisamnes' chair, with its macabre recovering, resurfaces as a powerful metaphor for the social costs of compromised justice. Today, when visiting the Groningen Museum in Bruges, Belgium, we can contemplate Gerard David's masterpiece that immortalized this story. The painting, with its meticulous composition and graphic details, continues to provoke discomfort and reflection in modern viewers, a testament to the enduring power of this narrative. Sisamnes, the judge who was flayed alive and whose skin was nailed to his successor's chair, thus offers us not merely a glimpse of the brutal justice of antiquity, but also a mirror in which we can examine our own conceptions of justice, corruption, and the sacred responsibilities of those to whom we entrust the power to judge.